I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 142. Today in the show, we are joined by outdoor writer PJ Reilly, and we're discussing his whitetail lessons learned while hunting deer in the Northeast. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Sitka Gear. And today in the show, we're joined by PJ Reilly, a super serious whitetail hunter and an outdoor writer hailing from the great state of Pennsylvania. And PJ has written for North American Whitetail Magazine, Game and Fish Mag, bowhunting.com, Lancaster Archery Supply, and many other publications. And we're going to be chatting with PJ today all about hunting whitetails in the Northeast. A whole bunch of different things related to that region of the country. And we're also going to touch on some things related to archery and then just a whole bunch of other lessons learned that PJ's had when it comes to chasing deer across the country. So I think that's going to be really interesting. I'm excited to talk to PJ. But before we get that conversation going, we need to pause here briefly for our weekly parenting advice segment from my co-host, Dan Johnson. Right?
I guess. I mean, it's funny that you bring this up because I just had.
Of course,
I was really excited to talk about like deer hunting, right, or sheds hunting, or something like that. But it's funny you bring that up because I just had a conversation with my daughter, and her question to me. She comes. I have this little office. It's next to the bathroom, and she was going to the bathroom, and she came in. She came out of the bathroom, and her pants were down. And I said, "Ava, what are you doing?" She's like, "Oh, Dad, why do I have to wipe my butt after I poop?" And it's like, I don't know how to answer that really. So I just did what I always do. No matter what, I always say, "Oh, because of germs now, go wash your hands," or, whatever. So it's almost like I need advice sometimes.
Do you need advice on why you need to wipe your butt?
Well, because, it's like I told Abe, I'm like, because you don't want to be known as the girl at preschool with stinky butt.
True.
We all know that one person who had stinky butt growing up, and you don't want to be that person.
You don't want to be that person. I can think of that person in my head right now from my school. Yep. Don't want to be that guy.
It's the same guy or gal that had to wear the poop your pants pants.
Yeah, it's no good.
The extra pants that were sitting in your classroom, that if you pooped your pants, you had to wear the poop your pants pants. And everybody at that point knew who pooped their pants, because they were usually like some 1970s suede, just Velcro I don't know. Anyway,
It
so deer
sounds like
hunting in America.
It sounds like you really know what these pants look like and felt like and all that kind of stuff, Dan.
Yeah, there's this kid named Brock in my
Yeah, sure.
elementary school.
Sure,
and
it was
he wore 'em
Brock.
all the time.
Sure, it wasn't a Dan.
No, I never pooped in my pants, man.
Well, I'm glad we got that out of the way. Deer,
Deer,
like you said, deer.
deer. So what's up? You find any sheds yet?
Dude, I live in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't found a shed. I've done a little walking. I think since we last talked, I picked up a new piece of shed hunting permission. I walked that, and I thought I thought there's a decent chance because I've been seeing a lot of deer feed out in this cut bean field, and there were some kind of brushy draws and some timber, and then a cut bean field right next to it. And I was kind of excited to walk that. I walked it last week, maybe Wednesday or Thursday for a couple hours, and didn't find a thing. But later that night, I happened to be nearby and saw out there in the field that I'd walked 3 antlered bucks. So the deer here seemed, at least those were still holding. So I'm going to try again maybe next week there and see if maybe those antlers dropped. And I'm going to try to get permission on the properties, 2 properties that are adjacent to this one that have a little more cover. And maybe pick one up. One of the bucks was pretty nice for a Michigan deer. He was just a good 2-year-old, I'd guess. So that'd be a nice set if I could happen to find him. So that's about all that's been going on for me so far. I'm just excited. I leave tomorrow morning bright and early to go to Iowa.
Nice.
So pumped about
Sounds like your boy Ross Hossman's probably Ross Hossman. Right?
I like to call him Ross Hossman, but it's Hausman is the correct pronunciation.
All right. RH.
Yeah.
All right. RH. All right. Anyway, he's probably found all the sheds already, if there is any.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I went on a drive with my kids on Sunday night. We drove around. Dude, I bet you I saw close to 200 deer out in the fields, an hour before the sun was going down. No antlers, but they all looked like does, right? Yeah. So this time of year, you can typically tell if they're a buck because their tarsal glands might be stained a little bit more than the normal animal. So that's one way I can tell if it's a buck and maybe it's shed its antlers. However, I turned around this corner and I saw 7 bucks all holding their antlers still, except for one, and he was the biggest one, and he had already shed one side. Wow. So they were all still holding, and there's that.
Yeah, it seems like excuse me, been hearing from a lot of people that it just seems maybe they're holding a little bit longer this year. So I'm hoping that by the time we're down there, hopefully there's going to be some antlers on the ground. But Ross has been walking some of his properties already and found some. So they're on the ground. It's just a matter of being out there at the right time in the right place. So we've got a handful of properties that, to my knowledge, haven't been walked yet. So hopefully those are going to be a pretty big group of us, and hopefully we'll be able to come up with something between the group. So we're heading out tomorrow morning, me and my buddy Dustin, and we're going to walk some property I have permission on tomorrow. And then my buddy Corey is going to meet us tomorrow night, and maybe Ross too, and then we're going to camp. And then the next day, all of us plus Peter, another friend, are going to be walking. And then I think you possibly will be meeting us on Friday, right?
Yeah, I think I'm taking a half day off work and be there between 10 and 11.
Nice. So we'll all do some walking, and then we'll be camping out and camping Friday and Saturday and shed hunting Saturday and Sunday. And I don't know, it's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of good times, a lot of laughs, and hopefully some antlers. So I'm stoked.
Did you say Corey Fall was coming?
Yeah, he'll be there Thursday night. All
right. So is he going to be walking on one of the flanks, or do you put him in the middle of the line?
I don't know. I don't know what the proper placement would be. Do you have any advice?
I don't want to be the guy to the left or right of him.
So the plan, Dan, is I actually have got a setup for us to record a podcast all together while we're there. So maybe Friday night when we get done, you and me and the rest of the guys, we can all sit down on the campfire and do a podcast talking about the day, shed hunting exploits. So
Nice.
we'll get to give Corey some crap in person, which will be fun.
Mm-hmm.
So
Looking forward to it.
yeah, I am too. Anything else new for you?
Not really, man. Just I think this weekend I might go take a couple shorter walks with the wife as Ava's going to a birthday party, and I got a babysitter for Saturday, like a sleepover type situation. So I'm getting rid of one kid, so I figured I might get someone to watch the other kid and spend some time with the wife and get her out, stretch the legs a little bit. And maybe if I'm good Sunday and have enough brownie points built up, I might go on another big one down south. But this weekend is also the Iowa Deer Classic, which is kind of always fun to go to. However, I think I like shed hunting just a little bit more.
Yeah, I do want to go to the Classic one of these years, but it
Were
won't
you
be
at
this
it?
year.
Before? The Iowa Classic before?
I've never been to the Iowa show.
I think the first time I met you was that at the Michigan show, the first time I ever met you?
Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe.
I thought maybe the first time we met was at one of the film schools way back in the day. But
Yeah, could have
maybe not.
Could have been. I don't know.
It's been a long
Those are
time.
blurry. Yeah, those are blurry for me.
Yeah, for multiple reasons. Hey, you know what? I have another random piece of exciting news.
What's that?
I just paid for, and because of, well, I believe it's guaranteed. I just paid for and got my Montana deer hunting license for the 2017 season.
Oh, badass. Yeah,
Yeah.
I talked with Randy Newberg a while back on the phone, and he's like, Dan, you got to get out here sometime.
Mm-hmm.
So one of these days,
Yeah, man. It's
maybe 2018 I'll go.
There you go. You just gotta stop. You gotta stop popping out all these babies, Dan. You got to make sure you got time to get out and hunt.
Well, I don't think that announcement has been made on this podcast.
What announcement's that?
The announcement that I'm having a third kid due October 28th.
Oh! I wasn't trying to force that. I didn't know if that was okay yet. But
No, I made the announcement on the podcast that I had this past week. So, or on the Nine Finger Chronicles podcast, and because I was talking with my buddy Justin Czar from bowhunting.com, and he's got 3 kids now, and his kid was born October 28th. So he kind of had a different type of rut. At least my kid will be, quote unquote, established at that point.
Okay, so tell me this. Well, first off, when's the approximate due date?
Based off of the first doctor's visit, the due date is September 28th.
Okay. So here's my question. What do you think is better, for the due date to be, or for the baby to be born at that point, sometime in September, but then you're going to have like a 4-week-old or a 6-week-old or a 7 or 8-week-old during the heat of the hunting season, October, and the rut.
Right.
When it comes to the rut, you're going to have a 6-week-old or whatever it's going to be.
Yep.
That sounds tough. So is that better or worse than having no baby in October, but then having it born, like November 10th or something, right during the rut?
Oh,
What
man.
do you think?
Well, I think that after the baby comes, I might be able to, sneak away to the main farm. Now, if the baby hadn't come yet and it was getting close, I would feel obligated to stick around closer to home, right?
Gotcha.
Still go out and hunt, but not, make it down to the main farm. Once the baby's already here, I can have grandma come up, or I can have somebody come up. Now, the thing that I'm kind of playing around with is the very first week in September, I had planned to go to Colorado for an elk hunt.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, if it's all good, my daughter went 3 days early ahead of due date, and my son, I think he went 5 or 6 days early instead of a due date. So if for some reason the kid, I don't think the kid's going to come 15 or 15 days early. So I think I'm still going to be able to squeeze this elk trip in. The only problem is, my wife's going to be 33 weeks pregnant, 34 weeks pregnant when I'm out elk hunting. So
Wow.
So here's a question for you, because you own your own business, and I'm starting to get some sponsorship dollars coming in for the Nine Finger Chronicles. Do I take some of that money and buy a date, like a babysitter to come to the house at that time so I can actually get out and hunt? And do you think that is a tax write-off?
I think that is the best investment you can make right now, Dan.
I know. Right.
We can't have a November 3rd end of season date again. We gotta pay for the babysitter, get out there and hunt and do this stuff, because I think that's smart. Write that stuff off. Do it. Right.
I'm gonna try.
Do you have an accountant yet?
I don't. My accountant is usually me, and it's like that little voice in your head. It's like, yes, you should buy another pair of hunting boots, or yes, you definitely need more Sitka gear, or whatever.
So it sounds like a very wise advisor. I'm good. You're in good, happy you're in good hands.
He's belligerently drunk most of the time.
Well, you might want to look at getting a real accountant, because things get a little bit complicated as your business grows.
Right.
Oh,
I'm rolling the dice right now.
All right, I that sounds right on par with basic Dan Johnson 101. So
that's right.
So here's a question, Dan. What the listeners don't know, but you and I know, is that you actually aren't able to join us on the interview with PJ, because that interview actually happened yesterday, and you couldn't go because your power went out, right? Right. So the conversation that I had with PJ is about hunting deer in the Northeast.
Right.
I want to know, since you didn't get to listen to that, what do you think, or what kind of advice do you have for hunting deer in the Northeast, Dan?
Like Northeast Iowa, or like Maine?
This is like Northeast U.S., but you feel free to spin it however you want.
Well, I tell you, if I'm going to give advice on a place I've never hunted before, I'm going to make an assumption that there are also a lot of people, a higher population of people, which means more pressure, which means the hunter should probably not go into their properties as much. If you run trail cameras, let your trail cameras do the scouting for you, and pick the best possible days to be aggressive with, if you have the opportunity to do a run and gun in, first time in, best time in type scenario.
That's pretty good, Dan. That's pretty good.
So that's an assumption. Now there's a lot of guys out there right now probably going, Dan is a dipshit and I will never take advice from him. So whatever.
Well,
just
whatever.
I've talked to some guys out who hunt out there, and it's cool. It's just straight different, because I talked to a guy who hunts in Maryland, and he hunts in basically a housing development. In his biggest piece of property is 3 acres.
Yeah.
Everything else is smaller.
Isn't that crazy?
Right.
I killed my first buck ever with a bow, and I've told the story years ago, but the first deer I ever killed was on a 3.5 acre property. So So there you go. That was my experience in the very beginning too. So Dan, one final thing. We're really going long with this intro, but
that's all right.
We talked on your podcast. I think it was last week.
Yep.
And speaking of this whole topic that we're talking about right now, on that podcast, you said that if ever you're able to quit your day job and go full-time with the Nine Finger Chronicles, then you will come and hunt Michigan and experience this type of world that we have in Michigan and Pennsylvania and New York and other states like that. So can you just reaffirm that here to the Wired to Hunt audience?
Right. I'm going to look for this awesome ranch. It's called the Kenyon Ranch. It's up in I'm after this one buck called Holyfield. Yeah. Not sure if he's alive yet, but no. Yeah, dude. If I guarantee it. I'll put the Dan Johnson name on it, if that holds anything. That's probably like child paste for arts and crafts, but if I ever am able to quit my job and go Nine Finger Chronicles full time, I will come and do some form of a hunt in Michigan.
You heard it right there, folks. Dan is going to leave Iowa and come to Michigan. So support the Nine Finger Chronicles, right?
Yeah, that's right.
All
That's
right.
right. Yeah, right. So it's just like, yeah, let's cheer for Dan just so we can feed him, just so we can put him in a bad situation.
That's exactly what I want. So
I would love to do that.
it'd be fun. So
Hey, I got a question for you. Here, last question.
All right.
I'm sorry.
no, you're good.
What would happen if you're like, Dan, you can come and hunt on my property, and Holyfield stepped out? What would happen?
Well, two things. Number one, I wouldn't let you. Number two, and number two, I'm going to kill Holyfield next year, so he won't be around when you get here.
Oh, amen.
So that's
There you go.
fingers crossed.
Right.
Probably unlikely. Oh man, I'm actually working on my film right now, kind of telling the story of Holyfield this past year, and I'm excited about that. And speaking of that, we need to take a break now to pause for our Sitka story, and then we're gonna get rid of Dan, and we're gonna bring in PJ then after that, and we'll get this show on the road. So, like I just said, I'm working on this Holyfield film, and I thought for today's Sitka story, I could actually share a story of my own and a little bit of a preview of that film here to come in the next few weeks, hopefully. So, my Sitka story today is an interview that I recorded just after my first close call with Holyfield during this past season. Holy smokes. That was a crazy, crazy night. As you might have seen, the last footage I had was Holyfield walking into the food plot. I snort-wheezed him in. He came into the food plot, and then he started pushing the dough across it. I'm still shaking. He started pushing the dough across it. He ran across my shooting lanes, stopped behind a bunch of branches, and then I thought we were going to come out. I started to sit, so I started to slowly sit down in my chair, and when I sat, it creaked. So he was froze there for a while. And then he walked right out just fine. But I drew back on him, and it was just too dark. It was right last light. I just could not see my pins, and he was too far out. He was probably 40 yards. If he was at 20, I maybe could have taken the shot, but at 40, I couldn't do it. So, crazy night. I saw like 5 different mature bucks. I saw Holyfield. Not only did I see him when I drew back on him, but then he went back in the field chasing does and disappeared for a long time, and then I sat waiting. And then he came back in like 20 minutes later after dark. I hadn't gotten out of the tree yet, and I saw deer come back in the food plot. Here he is at 20 yards. I can see him in my binoculars, but wow. I saw Holyfield. I saw that big 9 that I'm calling Frazier, and 3 other nice bucks. I'm not sure which ones they were. I think one was Mayweather. Just a crazy night. Crazy, crazy night. It was indeed a crazy, crazy night, and that was a Sitka story. In fact, on that hunt, I was wearing a Sitka Fanatic hoodie and shacket and the Stratus pants. So if you would like to learn more about Sitka gear for yourself, you can visit sitkagear.com. And now, we will get back to the show and our conversation with PJ Reilly. All right, with us now on the line is PJ Reilly. Welcome to the show, PJ.
Hey, Mark. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm doing really well, and thank you for joining us. What about you? How's your day going?
Not too bad today. We had nasty weather last week, and now it looks like it's like 60-some degrees here. I'm in Pennsylvania, 70s tomorrow, and then it's supposed to drop. And last week that made like tornadoes in the area, so tomorrow shouldn't be a very good day.
How crazy has this weather been this winter?
Just insane. And me personally, I'm a winter person, so I feel like I'm kind of cheated because I don't expect in August I'll get any 40-degree days. So
that's true. That's true. My issue with it is that I feel like we're getting these like false expectations. Like we're getting these 60-degree days, and it's gotten me excited for spring now. But I know, like you said, that cold weather's going to come back in, and it's going to stomp all my hopes and dreams out. So.
I think it's supposed to be 70 tomorrow, and I think we're supposed to get snow on Friday. So there you go.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy, PJ. So PJ, I have been reading your articles for a long time now. But for those who aren't familiar with what you do, can you just tell us a little bit about what it is you do now, and maybe a little bit about your background in hunting and how you got to this point?
Sure. So I am a technical writer for Lancaster Archery Supply. We are the world's largest dealer of target, bow hunting, and 3D archery. If it has to do with archery, we sell it. And we're, everybody here is fanatical about archery. We're into tournaments, we're into bow hunting, we're into it all. And so I work mainly on the company's website, our social media pages. I do a blog for the site, about anything and everything archery. So that's what I do full time. And then also, in addition to that, I've been a magazine writer for, 20 some years. I'm currently the bow hunting editor for Buckmasters magazine. I write for Bowhunter, Peterson's Bow Hunting, Sports Afield, North American Whitetail, yada, yada. There's a whole host of things that I do that for. And so that's what I do. I'm like you. I'm kind of immersed in it each and every day. And it's just something that I always wanted to do. I'm kind of a self-taught hunter. I didn't come from a hunting family. So once I got out of college, I sort of found my way. And being, as we'll get into it, being where I live, if you want to hunt deer, you kind of have to be a bow hunter. That's just because of the density of the population here. That's your best bet for if you want to get permission to hunt private property, you got to be a bow hunter. So that's kind of how I got to where I am.
What was that process like? Teaching yourself to hunt, 20 years old or however old that was. I mean, how did you manage that?
It was fun. Let me tell you, my first in training to learn how to hunt, I started out doing 3D shoots. I remember vividly going to my first 3D shoot with 12 arrows, and I came home with none. So that is kind of how things went. And from same thing within the woods. I mean, I'd go out in the woods kind of with my bow, and I'm kind of like, well, now what do I do? And just kind of walking around, didn't know about tree stands. So it was a long process, but I enjoyed it. Eventually then I started making friends, and they started showing me things. And so that's kind of how it progressed from there.
Do you remember?
And now I'm addicted.
Yeah. I think a lot of us can relate to that.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, do you remember your first deer? I'm sure you do.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes, it was a button buck, and I shot it with my bow. My very first deer was a bow kill. And I remember distinctly this is 1990, I think. Back then, the lighted sight pins that they had were actually, it was a fiber optic, so it kind of shined back at you, not like today where the pins were illuminated. So it was getting failing light. I turned on this pin, and it was like a spotlight right in my eye, so I couldn't see very well. And I remember, I shouldn't have done it, but I remember my pin just getting close, and I just cut loose and had no idea where I was aiming. And fortunately, it hit the right spot.
Yeah. That sounds a lot like my first kill, too. Probably a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. You don't, because that first one, you don't really know what to expect.
Yeah.
If you've never done it before, it's all foreign.
Yeah,
it's amazing what you learn then, about deer body language and, shoot, no shoot situations. But early on, it can be rough.
Yeah, that's the truth. Something that we talk a lot about, we've talked a lot about on past episodes, myself and Dan, my co-host, who's usually with us, is that moment there at the very end where you are dealing with that moment of truth. And we kind of go through this debate between the two of us sometimes where the people that are really good at handling the moment of truth and handling buck fever, is that like are you born with that? Are you just a stone cold ice in the veins type who can handle that? Or is it one of those things that just comes with experience? What, from your perspective, is it? And what have you seen in your case?
for me, and being primarily a bow hunter, what I noticed after a while is I mean, that first one was crazy, but I had been shooting competition archery for 2 years before I got to that point, so I could shoot a bow. And after that, what I remembered was, because I was so familiar with shooting a bow, when it came to that moment, I would kind of like blank out, just go on autopilot. It was just muscle memory would take over. I would do what I needed to do, and boom, next thing I know, I'd be like, oh, that was a good shot. But but then as soon as it was past, boy, the knees start shaking and the heart starts thumping. But when it came time to shoot, and still, when it comes time to shoot, things just happen on their own.
Yeah.
And more often than not, fortunately, they turn out the best.
Yeah.
Doesn't always happen that way, but usually more often than not, that happens.
Yeah, I can 100% relate. I too, fall into that autopilot. But for me, I've actually been able to transition from early on in my bow hunting career. I would go into autopilot, but it would be autopilot in a bad way. In that, it would just happen, and I wasn't able to be settled in or take my time, so I'd rush a lot of shots. But I've been able to progress now, where like you said, mistakes still happen, but for the most part, I'm in that kind of business mode, autopilot mode. But it now the process is smooth, and I don't need to think about it. And knock on wood, it's been going pretty well. But it is interesting how that kind of comes from experience and practice and all that.
Well, one of the things that I've found here lately is, for the last several years, I like many hunters, I went through the progression to where shooting a lot of deer was what was important. And so I would get lots of doe tags. I'd hunt multiple states, shoot everything I could. But then the last several years, I've switched back to where now I'm hunting mature bucks. And one thing I found is I actually got out of that killer mode, if you will, to where, because I'm not shooting a lot of deer regularly, I've had some problems the last couple of years. I've had some hits that were bad that I thought, man, I should have nailed that deer. And then after it happened a couple of times, I was like, you know what? It's because I'm not shooting as many deer as I used to, so I'm not familiar with the situation. So I did an article last year about that. I was like, hey, 3Ds are great for practice, but it's not the same thing. Shooting a live deer is a unique experience, and the only way to get good at it is to do it a lot.
Yeah. So was there any other adjustments you made, or was it just going back to shooting more does and that kind of thing, just to keep that going?
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it. It just, I just had a couple where I was like, man, I that should have been a gimme. I mean, that should have been, inside 30 yards, nothing in between me and the deer. That should have been a gimme, and somehow I screwed it up. So I thought, I was rushing. I'm not taking my time. I got to fix that. So
yeah.
I'm going to go back to shooting more deer.
Yeah. Speaking of the other type of shooting you do, you mentioned you were doing a lot of 3D shooting and some tournament stuff. How has that helped you as a bow hunter, and is that something that more people should consider getting involved in?
Yes, totally. And actually, I've been working on a series of articles about this, to where the very most basic thing I would say is, the more you shoot your bow, the better. I mean, whatever you shoot it at. Shooting your bow is better than not shooting your bow. It's just, there's so many things that happen with muscles that just are better if you are shooting a lot. Then kind of fine-tuning that, if you only shoot 3Ds or paper animals or something where you're not aiming at a dot, what I've noticed is your form won't be as solid, but you won't know it. Only through shooting, if you mix in dots as well, shooting bullseyes, you'll know if you're not holding steady. Right away you'll notice. But if you're aiming at the vitals of the deer, you figure that's about the size of a pie plate. There's a lot of margin for error in there, inside that pie plate, versus if you're shooting, a typical Vegas type target, your 10 ring is about the size of a silver dollar. You're going to know if your hand is kind of wandering. So mixing those two together, with the target archery, you learn precision aiming. You learn to fix your form flaws, because if you have form flaws, they're going to stand out. And then going over, of course, you don't want to be dependent on an aiming dot when you're hunting deer. You may not have one. You may just have to aim at a patch of brown. So shooting at 3D, then with the two together, you can really fine tune to make yourself, the best bow hunter you can be.
Yeah. Continuing on this topic, now that we're talking about this, are there any other, in addition to what you just mentioned there, switching up between 3D and, specific targets and stuff, are there any other things you suggest to people at this time of year, this off season, winter, early spring time period, that people should be considering to, implement within their kind of practice regimen? Anything different, or exercises or anything that have helped you?
Yeah, obviously, any cardiovascular, any muscular training you can do, all of that helps. But none of it helps like shooting your bow. I'm always amazed. We'll have, I'll be working in our shop, and there'll be a big, huge guy come in. He can probably bench press 300 pounds. He's a super strong guy. I'll hand him my 70-pound bow, and he can't pull it back. It's not that he's not strong enough. It's that he doesn't have the coordination, which that's what you get through, just like I said, just shooting that bow over and over and over again. You develop that coordination. So, the training, cardiovascular, that's always good, because that helps, anytime you're bow hunting, hiking back in. And, of course, muscle training, that's going to make it easier for you to hold your bow, et cetera. But wintertime, boy, that's a great time to shoot. Indoor leagues, just shoot a lot.
Yeah, just lots of arrows and build that muscle memory, right?
Exactly.
It's nice with these warmer days. I've been able to get outside and do some shooting when usually I'd just be, in the barn or something. It's nice to be catching some sun rays, and that's not too common in February.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that we like to do, with training for archery is shooting distance. I may not shoot a deer at 70 or 80 yards, but I'll shoot targets at that distance all day long, just because it makes you better at 30 and 40 yards. Yeah. Any twitch of your hand at 80 yards, and that arrow is going to be several inches off target. So it just really fine tunes your form. So yeah, we like getting outside so we can shoot distance.
Yeah, we're going down a wormhole here, but
sorry.
You've got this is my fault, PJ, because I'm interested in this stuff. I want to talk about deer, but I want to understand a few things too with this, since you've got so much expertise. Okay, let's say you're shooting at 70 or 80 yards because you're trying to really fine tune things. How do you start self-diagnosing what the issue is? So let's say whether it's at 70 or it's at 30 or whatever, you start seeing that you're off. How do you begin the process of self-diagnosis?
Self-diagnosis is probably pretty difficult. What I would say that you should diagnose is that you have a problem. You may not know what that problem is, but if you just can't be consistent, know that and tell yourself, hey, I got a problem here. And then go to your shop and have somebody watch you shoot. 9 times, I'll say 99 times out of 100 even, what we see at Lancaster Archery is issues with people, how they hold the bow. That's hands down the most common issue we see. That bow grip looks like something you should grab like a pistol, but if you hold it like that, you're going to have problems, especially at distance, because you're going to torque the bow, and at 70 yards, you're going to see that. So just if you're shooting 70 yards and you just can't hold a tight group, 70 yards, it's not, eventually you should be able to have all your arrows, in a circle the size of a coffee cup. That's, even though it's 70 yards, that's not unheard of. Today's bows, they're perfectly capable of doing that. If you find that your group just isn't getting any smaller, tell yourself, hey, I got a problem, and then go find an expert who can help you figure out what that problem is. It could be something with equipment. You never, if you're shooting an arrow that's too weak of a spine, at 20 yards, you're not going to notice. That's not going to be a problem. You start backing up, now that's going to be an issue. So it could be many things, but somebody at your local pro shop, they can help you figure that out.
Yeah, that's good advice. And it takes, and I got to say, I am guilty of just always pushing off the trip to the pro shop because I don't want to make the drive, or I don't want to deal with waiting around and stuff like that. But it's such a, it's a good idea to get in there and talk to people that have experience in this kind of stuff, because to your point,
for sure,
it's really tough to figure out that kind of thing out on your own.
It is, and unfortunately, and that's one of the reasons, Rob Caulfield, he's our owner, that's one of the reasons that he hired me, and he hired we now have a full-time cameraman too, was just to get information out there, because unfortunately there is a lot of bad information. Just within the last 6 months, I won't say who, but I saw a well-known figure do a video where she was saying that the way you grip your bow doesn't matter, that you hold it any way you want, and, that's the way to do it. And I thought, man, if she would talk to a coach, I guarantee you there's a reason Levi Morgan, Jesse Broadwater, and all the top archers, if you look at their hand position, it's all the same. That's not by accident.
Yeah.
There's a right way to hold it, and there's a wrong way. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there. But if you get to your pro shop, I guarantee you, somebody there is going to know the right information.
Yeah, that's a good reminder for all of us. I actually need to go to the pro shop to get my peep sight moved on a new bow, so I need to make that trip too.
Yes, that will help.
Yes, it definitely will. So let's shift gears here a little bit, PJ.
Deer.
Let's talk deer.
Sure.
And you have this unique perspective of hunting and living in Pennsylvania and some experience in the Northeast, and that's something we haven't actually got to talk about as much as we probably should have here on the podcast.
I don't know if I would say a unique perspective or some kind of curse that I was born here. Or
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like that.
I think I can feel your pain there a little bit, because I like to milk the curse of hunting and living in Michigan. So I think in Pennsylvania,
yes,
there's some similarities there. But
you definitely feel my pain.
Yeah. So let's talk about that pain though, PJ. Where all have you hunted in the Northeast, and can you just kind of give us a high-level overview for those that don't hunt in that part of the country? What's unique about it? What's that like?
I've hunted, obviously, Pennsylvania my whole life. I've hunted New York, New Jersey, Ohio, Maryland, West Virginia, pretty much everything right around Pennsylvania. And here in the Northeast. And basically, the two main issues are the hunter density, well, in Pennsylvania in particular, hunter density, then just density of people who live here. And then the third thing I would say is the relative size of properties. Here in Pennsylvania, I personally don't know anyone who has access to 1,000 acres of private property, contiguous land. Such places exist here, but they're pretty rare.
Right.
Where I live, if there's a farm, it's usually under 100 acres. So, I may have access to my 70 acres, of my farm. Well, then there's another guy right next door who has access to the next 40 acres. And then the next guy down the street, he's hunting that 30 acres. And all down, and actually right around my house, it's even less than that. It's, I got 6 acres here, the neighbor's got 11, another guy's got 5. So that's a totally different perspective than someone who has the run of 400, 500, 600 acres. There's only so many trees you can put a stand in on 6 acres.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, that's something I can definitely relate to here in Michigan too.
Yeah, so it's just a different experience. I think you have to have different expectations. Certainly, I go to Illinois every year. I've been hunting there for 15 years every year, and it's different. Just because you're so confined here, it's just a different thing. And one of the misconceptions can be, I live in a very suburban area, and a lot of people think, oh, that's great hunting down there, because access is so hard to get. It's hard to get if you're from the outside. That doesn't mean nobody's hunting there, because I can tell you pretty much around me, if a place can be hunted, someone is hunting it. Yeah. That's the Pennsylvania. I'm sure that's the same in Michigan. Mm-hmm. One of the good things about hunting in Pennsylvania is it's an accepted way of life, I think, more. So we don't see a whole lot of the anti-hunting. You just don't run into that much.
Yeah. I want to go back to what you mentioned just a second ago, being expectations. And if you're someone who hunts in Pennsylvania or Michigan or New York or, Virginia or some of these other states that aren't necessarily like the Midwest top tier whitetail states that we see on TV or see in the magazines and everything, why do you think why are expectations important to that type of hunter? And then can you help us better understand, what we should be thinking about when trying to set proper expectations in a situation like that?
Sure. If I go to Kansas, 150-inch deer is a very real possibility. Here in Pennsylvania, I've been hunting here since 1990. What's that? I'm in my 27th year. I don't know that I think I've maybe ever seen one deer of that size, ever. I've never shot one like that. A friend of mine killed it. So it's not that it's not realistic for me to expect that. Well, it is unrealistic for me to expect that. But if that's my goal and I don't achieve it, I can't really be upset, because the odds of that here are pretty slim. But if I know that, well, then, hey, that's okay. But if you go out every year and you're like, oh, man, I want to kill a 140, you can't really be upset when you don't.
Right.
Because for the longest time before Pennsylvania changed its deer management program in 2001, the biologist said, hey, Pennsylvania hunters kill on average 80 to 90% of the 1.5-year-old deer every year.
Wow.
That doesn't leave a lot left to get to 2.5, then let alone 3.5, 4.5, 5.5.
Yeah.
We've since moved that scale a little bit to now where we don't kill as many 1.5 years. I think we're above 50% that they're at least 2.5 or older, but the biologists will be the first to tell you they're pretty much now we're just killing 2.5-year-old deer. So that's still, that's a heck of a 2.5-year-old deer that gets to 150. That's a heck of a deer. That's going to be pretty rare.
Yeah. So do you set your expectations in Pennsylvania, or I guess how do you personally set your expectations? Is it based on you're trying to kill a certain size antler buck, or is it age, or do you just shoot whatever one makes you excited, or how do you go through that process?
What my thought is? My thought is, I don't want to shoot one that I can clearly see is 1.5 or 2.5. The small deer with the skinny neck, those deer kind of stand out. I don't want to shoot one of those. That's me personally. And then for antlers, it's if it's definitely not in that age class, I'll shoot it. There's a deer that's been living behind my house that is actually a giant 6-pointer. This thing has an enormous frame, and I can tell. I have several pictures of that deer. He's at least 3.5. Now, this deer wouldn't score for anything. I would love to kill that deer. Yeah. He is just unique. I just think he's an awesome deer. So that's kind of my expectations, and I think those are realistic expectations. I don't kill a deer every year, but I do pass up ones that are legal deer, and I'm okay with that. That's fine with me. I don't have to shoot. But I'm probably like a lot of hunters. my basement is full of the exact same 8-pointer.
Yeah.
14, 15-inch 8-pointer, 112, 115 inches. I probably got 10, 15 of those.
Yeah.
Do I need to shoot another one? No. Personally, I don't. But that's me. Somebody else, I get it. They may have limited time. They get out a couple days. They want to shoot the first legal buck. Good. Do it. That's your business. Knock yourself out. I don't have any problem with that. But like I said, for me, that's kind of how I set my goals going into a season.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So okay, you mentioned two of the unique factors there in a place like Pennsylvania are small properties and very high density of other hunters and people. So how do you tackle those two issues? How do you deal with the heavy hunting pressure, and how do you uniquely deal with small properties? How does that change your hunting strategy?
Well, first off, I should say we are fortunate here to have a lot of public land in Pennsylvania. There is a lot. Just our state game commission, which is comparable to DNR in other states, just our state game commission owns, I think it's 1.5 million acres.
Wow. On
top of that, we've got state forest. We've got the Allegheny National Forest, which it alone is 500 and some thousand acres. So we've got probably, I think the last number I saw was pushing 3 million acres of public hunting land, which in a state the size of Pennsylvania, that's pretty significant because I think we're fourth in overall population in the country. So we're not a big state, but we got a lot of people. So there is a lot of public land out there. Unfortunately, it hasn't always been managed in the best way. And so there are, you'll have one tract of state game lands that might be 40, 50,000 acres, and boy, you can spend all day and have trouble finding one deer. But that is an avenue. If you want to go back in, we've had many studies here that show the guy who's willing to really hoof it in and get more than a mile from the road, you can get away from the crowds. Will you find deer? Well, that's the next hurdle. But you can get away from the people on public land. Where I live down in the southeast, basically between Philadelphia and Harrisburg. If people are familiar with that, that's where I live. We don't have a lot of public land, and the public land we do have really gets pounded. So I stay away from that. My strategy is more trying to get on to smaller private properties, or we have some public land that allows limited access to certain groups. You have to pass tests and things like that. And with them being smaller properties, I just try to line up several of them. So, maybe I have 6 acres I can hunt here, 10 acres over there, 15 here. That's kind of my strategy versus having one good place. I have several smaller places to hunt. That's kind of been my strategy. We're very fortunate here. We have groups like the Natural Lands Trust that they come in, and fortunately they're eager to buy up places in Pennsylvania because they want to preserve it before it gets developed. And they understand the value of hunting, so they allow hunting, and they run these hunting programs. You have to pass a test to get in. So I'm in 2 places like that, where it's public land, public hunting land. So the number of hunters is pretty limited, and it's decent. It's not great, but it's pretty decent. So that's kind of that's kind of the strategy I take. I don't have my brother-in-law has a camp in the mountains, but I don't go up there much for deer hunting. I just as soon hunt around home, before work, after work, on weekends, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think about when I'm hearing about your situation, hunting a series of these small properties, at least for me in my hunting, in my hunting experiences, one of the things I'm always concerned about the most is being really careful about when I hunt a spot to keep that pressure low, and trying to make sure, and trying to make sure I'm not going in there too much or things like that. And that's a consideration, even when I'm hunting, 80 or 90 acre pieces, let alone a 6 acre piece. So how does that factor? How does your hunting pressure factor into how and when you hunt these little pieces?
I kind of call that taking the temperature, taking the temperature of the property. Because they are these small properties, a deer, we know, has average home range of about a mile. Well, how am I going to catch him when he's on that 6 acres I can hunt? And from what I've seen over the years is deer kind of have a cyclical pattern, and you kind of have to stay on top of what's happening on your properties to know when they're going to be there, to hit it right. You can do that with trail cameras, maybe hunting it, one morning, one day a week, hunting or hunt a morning on Monday and hunt an evening on Friday. I've found by doing that, I can usually then figure out, okay, I need to be here at this time. Between that and my cameras. But yeah, you're right, because I have seen, obviously I learned through trial and error. I'd go in and hunt the same stand day after day after day, and then the deer sightings would just dwindle, and then I wasn't seeing anything. It was pretty clear what was happening. Because I couldn't move, the deer moved.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple science there. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. But, that's kind of how I go about it. And to be honest, there'll be periods like the second and third week of October. I don't think I've ever killed a deer in Pennsylvania. So because of that, I don't invest too much time then. I mean, I understand anything's possible. The deer of a lifetime could walk by then, but my history has shown those aren't the best times. I'm not going to put a lot of effort then. First week, and then once you start getting around Halloween, and then on into November, then I'm going to start putting more effort in.
Yeah. I've found a similar thing to be true too for me for that same basic reason, trying to keep pressure low. I'll hunt early this season, first few days in the season, that first week, and then lay off it, and then wait till that pre-rut type of activity starts, and then, the odds of that movement rises up, and so it's worth the risk of going in there and putting pressure on those deer because the opportunity is so much greater.
Yeah, and interestingly, I moved to a new place 2 years ago, so this year was my second season living where I am, and I can hunt right around my house. And one of the unique things I noticed is, for whatever reason, the best rut activity around there is November 16th to the 22nd. 2 years in a row, the exact same thing happened. I was out in Illinois hunting, and my wife's at home, and she's telling me, PJ, there's these big bucks running around the woods out here like crazy, all day.
Of course.
And I'm gone. And, I was hunting, figuring, first week in November, that's awesome. I'm sitting in my tree stand seeing nothing but does and little bucks. I'm like, what the heck's going on? Well, I've read up about this, that the deer on a local basis will have their sweet spot for activity like that. They tell you the rut, it's from, Halloween into the third week of November. That's, and there's a bell curve is what I've seen a picture of. Mm-hmm. Well, your individual location, the peak of that bell curve can move. It can be, 16th to the 22nd where I am, and 10 miles away, it can be the 4th to the 8th. I know there was another property I hunted for a long time, and I knew that if I was in my tree stand November 7, 8, 9, something was going to happen. Those were the days on that property. So just experience, cameras, observations, things like that. That's what you learn over time.
Yeah. It's interesting how there are those local variances that to your point, I think every place is a little bit different, and that experience, you start to pick up on that.
Sure.
So speaking back to kind of the different observations you're able to make on these properties. You mentioned using trail cameras and hunting and observing. Can you elaborate a little bit on how you scout these properties, both the details of what you're doing with trail cameras and any on-the-ground scouting you do, off-season, in-season, anything like that?
One of the good things, I guess, about hunting the small properties, like I said, is there's only so many places you can be. And it's usually, okay, if I only got 6 acres to work with, finding the main deer path is really all I can do. It may not be the best place in the area, but it's all I have access to. So, you know, I will find these trails, hunt them a few times, you know, and you can see what the deer are doing. Just paying attention to when they move and where they move, you can fine-tune your adjustments like that. Then for trail cameras, what I like is to just pick up on daytime deer movement. I don't have to see them, you know, from my stand. If I'm getting consistent daylight pictures of bucks, okay, now I know, all right, I need to be out there. You know, will a deer that I want come by? Who knows? But I can tell now, okay, this is the time. And like I said, both times, or the last 2 years, I have several mature bucks on my cameras in that time period, November 16th to 22. One of them, this year, it was my first day. I had been in Illinois for 8 days. My first day back, of course, I had to go to work. It was a Monday. But at 3:30, this giant 8-pointer walked about 30 yards from my house past my camera. He was chasing a doe. I thought, and I was at work, so I thought, oh, you got to be kidding me.
That's brutal.
And I had never seen that deer before. He hung around for 3 days. I never saw him again.
Isn't that crazy?
So, you know, it's just a deer that I'm sure a hot doe brought in, and then he was gone.
You know, an interesting thing that a number of people have shared with us here in the last year or two is that some people, and you've probably maybe seen some people talk about this in some of the magazines you've written for too, where they're talking about some of these kind of annual patterns where a buck like that maybe goes on a 3 or 4 day little trip might tend to do the same thing every year at the same time.
Sure.
I wonder if that's something that might be happening there too in your situation.
I could totally see that, you know. There's during the summer, there was a 10-pointer that I knew was only 2.5 years old. He was just a young deer, but boy, he had a beautiful 10-point rack. I was probably, I'm going to say he was probably about 125 inches. And I was like, oh man, I hope that deer lives. You know, I knew, hey, I'm not going to shoot that deer, but man, he's an awesome deer. I had pictures of this deer every day in July and August, and then one day he disappeared, and I never got another picture of him again until December 20th. I was sure he was dead. You know, somebody killed him. He hung around for one day, gone. Never saw him again until 2 weeks ago. And, you know, so what is that deer doing? Who knows? But I mean, to be so stuck to a pattern day after day after day after day. My wife would see him, you know, in the field at night when she would come home. And sure enough, once it got dark, he would come through our woods. He'd be on the camera. How can he be so stuck to that pattern and then completely disappear for, 3-4 months? I don't know, but, you know, so clearly they have things that they do. And so I can totally see where a buck would come in. Hey, it's November 15th, time to go through this piece of woods.
Yeah, it's mysterious and fascinating all at once, that's for sure.
For sure, yeah.
Back to this time period we're talking about, the rut, this November time period. How is hunting in the Northeast different during the rut compared to some of these other places you've been? I mean, I think a lot of times when we talk about hunting the rut in popular media, when you're reading about the Midwest, everyone's crashing antlers together and they're hunting little pinch points between crop fields and stuff. Is that stuff working for you in Pennsylvania, or is it very different at that time?
Me personally, I have never had luck rattling antlers in Pennsylvania. anytime I have tried it and had deer within sight, it scares the heck out of me.
Yeah.
That's been my experience. I don't know what's happening that does that. Well, I have an idea. I've sat in my tree stand enough and heard the neighbors calling.
Yeah.
Where my goal with calling is, I want whatever I'm doing to be absolutely, like, barely audible. I don't want to make. I can't get any of my calling quiet enough for my taste. But then to sit there and hear a guy that I know is 250 yards away and I can hear his grunts as clear as day, deer are hearing that as well. And so I believe that has an effect. I think your calling has to be completely different. Then when I go to Illinois, heck yeah, I'll bang antlers together. My grunts will be loud. I'll use the can, doe calls, all that. Pennsylvania, I might do one quiet grunt, just something that's as quiet as can be. That's what I have found to work. And I actually have called in several deer over the years, but it's always been subtlety is my main thing, which, now we have all these calls coming out, the growler, the hyper growl, calls that are very loud and aggressive. It's actually hard for me to find one that's quiet enough. And I've been in the woods and heard deer come through, and it's very subtle. I've never heard a loud grunt in PA. If I hear it, usually I'm like, what was that? Was that a tree creaking? What?
Right.
I mean, that sure sounded like a grunt. And then you look over and you see the deer, and boy, it's just real quiet. Meh, meh.
Yeah.
It's just not that aggressive stuff you'll hear out west.
Right.
Or Midwest.
Yeah. So what's the situation? What's the situation in Pennsylvania, or the type of situation where you have been able to use one of those soft grunts to get a deer in? Is that a situation where there's a deer close and you just needed him to come into range just a little more, or what's that specific circumstance where it might work in that area?
There's two things I like to do. One of the things I like to do, because I am anchored to small properties, is I like to do a lot of blind calling. I'm within calling distance of other people's properties, even doing it quietly. If I'm on a 3-acre piece, the neighbor's property is 50 yards away. So I do like to do a lot of blind calling where I am just a little bit louder. But in those situations, I'm very short. I might do 3 grunts, moderate volume, definitely not loud, 3 grunts, and then I may do a doe call. And then that'll be it for at least 40 minutes. That's usually my time frame I go by. And you'll be surprised, after 20 minutes, one will come in. The other scenario is, yes, where I see one. And then if I can see him, if I can see a buck, I don't care how far it is. He could be, well, obviously if he's like 30 yards away, I'm not calling at him. But if he's outside, 60 to 200 yards, I'm going to start out being absolutely as quiet as possible until I know he heard me. That's the only way I'll vary it. And then as soon as he hears me, I'm not calling again. Because I've seen even where, I'm sure lots of hunters have been there, to where you get the deer's attention and they don't really show interest. The next time you call, that thing takes off for the next county. And it's, even though they're not really paying attention to you, that's not the deer you're going to bring in. That deer's not in the right mood. Yeah. If you get the one that's in the right mood, that first call, he's going to somehow start angling. Even if he's going to circle to get downwind, he's angling towards you, and you'll know it. But interestingly, twice this has happened to me, to where I've had a hot doe come through with a buck, and the buck's grunting like crazy. And of course, my instinct reaction is to pick up the grunt call. And I've just learned through doing this a couple of times, and 2 times it worked to perfection. I switched and started calling the doe. I just picked up my can call, and because they're in that heavy chase, I've found it doesn't matter that I'm doing it over and over and over and over again. Eventually, that doe, both times, has worked her way right to the base of my tree, and I killed both of those bucks.
Wow.
And I think I saw one time where the doe came in. There was one hot doe with a herd, and that buck was doing everything he could to get that doe away from the herd, and all that doe wanted to do was get with the herd.
Yeah.
So I just started doing doe calling. Eventually she came over and I killed the buck. So obviously there's a lot of situational baseball there.
Sure.
But in general, whatever I do, I'm trying to do it as quiet as possible.
Yeah. In that specific instance with the doe situation, were you just using a doe and estrus can call, that kind of thing, or you were using like
Yes.
That was what you were doing? Okay.
Nope. I had the basic doe and heat Primos can call, just turning it over and over. And I mean, the two deer were making such a racket anyway, crashing through branches. They were running through the stream. The bucks grunting. I mean, it was loud even without me. And I just, I don't. Certainly, at some points they're not hearing me, but eventually the doe was like, hey, there's some relief over there.
Yeah, that's interesting. Speaking, one final question on the calling topic. Are you just using those types of calls in Pennsylvania during the rut, or will you ever use that type of soft grunting type of thing in the early season or later in the year and everything?
Yeah, I have there's one call I have, man, I've had it for about 15 years. I love it. It's a real tiny short mouth call that I can move a rubber band on. And so I can take a buck grunt and make it a little bit higher pitched so it's not quite as aggressive. And I've had luck with that in, early October. Just be sitting there and just give a nice meh. And I've had bucks come into that. I don't know if it's just a social thing or if it is some sort of pre-rut behavior, but I have had bucks answer that in the early season.
Interesting.
So I'll use that anytime. But, again, like I said, it's not going to be that low-pitched, more aggressive grunt. It's going to be a little higher-pitched.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've been talking about all these different types of adaptations from your calling standpoint or how often you hunt a property, and it's all kind of because of hunting pressure, how that changes deer behavior and everything. Has that unique issue that you deal with there in Pennsylvania or in the Northeast, has that changed at all how you think about stand placement? Where you put your tree stand or how high or what kind of stuff you do or think about when you set it up? It has.
Incidentally, when you just mentioned how high, I am a height freak. Nobody likes to hunt from my stand because they're going to be at least 20 to 25 feet. Basically, a lot of the woods I hunt are tulip poplar. It's just a great big, huge forest of telephone poles. It's hard. Deer know to look up, and you stick out. And I've just found if I can get in the 20 to 25 foot range, that seems to be out of their normal line of sight, or at least where they're not expecting danger. And I'm sure that's just from running into lots of people in tree stands.
Yeah.
And in walking through the woods and finding other people's tree stands, I've noticed other people don't do that. So I figure if I'm doing something everybody else isn't, that's got to be better for me.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, because of that, I'm also a safety nut. If I got a hang-on stand, it's got a lifeline running down. If I'm using my climber, I'm attached from the ground up. So I don't want to be a statistic. So.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anything else that you're doing just in general, whether it be in the Northeast or elsewhere, just to, when it comes to those stands and how you're situating them or anything?
Another thing is, when in doubt, I just get into thick stuff. I know that the common thinking is stay out of the thick stuff because that's the bedding area. where I am, deer don't like the open woods. Those tulip poplar forests, if they're in them, they're moving through them with a purpose. And I've just found if I can get into the thick stuff, that's where I'm going to find deer that are more calm and settled down and doing more of their natural thing. And again, I'm sure that's because of pressure. And even like as the season goes on, late September, a big stand of tulip poplars, you got lots of green on the ground. That's not so bad. Come November, there's some stands where I don't even hunt in there because I know I'm never going to see a deer in there. It's just too open. So I think that's one of the other things too, because of pressure, getting the thick stuff that never seems to be a bad idea. Yeah, you may dump them or you may bump them from a bedding area, but what else are you going to do?
Yeah.
I'll take that chance, Fortunately, one of the good things is there is a lot of thick stuff, so maybe I can come in to one side of a thicket when I know the deer at the other. There's actually one place that I hunt where it took me 4 years. I knew the deer were in this thicket, and it took me 4 years to figure out how to get in without chasing them all out. And then once I did, it was awesome. I had a couple of years where I killed deer, and then unfortunately, this being Pennsylvania, I'll never forget this. I shot a 10-pointer in there. I was dragging it out, and I took my cart all the way out to my truck, put it on the back, and I went home. What I didn't see was there was a guy coming down the hill the other way. He saw me with that deer on my truck with the cart. He followed my tracks back to my tree stand, and next year when I went in to hang a stand, no one had ever had a tree stand in there. When I went in there, there was a tree stand 10 yards away from the one I usually put mine in, and he had taken 2 of my bright eyes off the tree and marked his tree. Now, he had permission. The reason I know all this happened is I then saw him, and I said, hey, I said, no, I said, sorry, I'm in here. Nobody ever had a tree stand in here besides me. And he told me, he said, oh yeah, last year I saw you got that buck. It was a nice one. He said, so I followed your tracks. I figured this would be a good place for me to hunt. I mean, he straight out told me.
Oh, wow.
So,
that's awesome.
Well, but he had permission to be there. There's nothing I could do about it.
Yeah.
So I moved. I figured this isn't worth it. I'll find another place.
Yeah. What was
but
it?
That's typical.
Yeah. What was it that you were able to do to get in there? You mentioned that you'd figured out a different way to get in so you could hunt it. What specifically was it that you changed?
So the obvious route, there was a trail going. The part of the problems was there were 2 property lines that I couldn't cross. So it kind of forced me in through this one area, and I kept going through there, and I kept bumping deer, and I thought, oh, man, this is killing me. So what happened is I went and found one of the landowners, posted the land solid, and it took some convincing, but I told him, I was like, look, I'm not hunting your property. I just want to walk around through here. And he had his land bordered this stream. And so what I did was I just wanted to get in the stream and take that, and so that I could come actually from the back side of this tree I was hunting rather than the front. It was a little more open because the stream was there, etc. That's not where the deer were. They were on the other side. So that was how I finally figured out how to get in there. But with all the posted signs the guy had, for the first 3 years, I was intimidated. I thought, he's just going to yell at me. I don't want to deal with him.
Yeah.
Finally, I saw him one day, and I said, hey, just by any chance? He's like, no hunting, no hunting. And I said, well, I don't want to hunt. Would you have a problem with me just cutting this slight corner here to get in the stream? And he said, I guess that's not a problem. And
that's
said,
awesome.
Oh, well, perfect.
Yeah. It's amazing how access in tweaking your access in some ways can totally change how a place hunts. It's so important.
Oh, it did. And see, the problem is the new guy who then moved in, he came in the obvious route. And
Right.
so I knew he was just killing that spot, so
Yeah.
I moved.
That's brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of hunting the thick stuff like that, and how that's kind of necessary where you're hunting to get on these deer and see them moving in daylight. That's one of those things, though, when you hear someone who is hunting in Illinois or Iowa, maybe a lot of guys might say, "Oh, stay out of your thick stuff. Keep that as a
Right.
sanctuary. Just hunt outside of it." What other things like that we hear recommended for hunting in the low pressure big buck states in the Midwest? What other things they recommend do you find not to work in Pennsylvania, that northeastern guys need to ignore that advice and do something different?
One of the best is getting in close to houses. The deer know that that's a safe place to be, especially during gun season. They're going right for the houses. So fortunately here in PA, we have there's a 150-yard safety zone around any house, unless you get that homeowner's permission. Then you can violate that 150 yards. But with a bow, it's only 50 yards. So that opens up a lot more places in close to houses, which if I'm going to Illinois, I'm getting as far away from any house I see, as I can. But here in the Northeast, if you got a little woodlot tight to a house, that's where you're going to find your deer.
Interesting.
So you just gotta have to kind of. That's always tricky. I like to think I'm conscientious on the homeowner's behalf. I'm not. If I'm in that situation, I'm taking pretty much only a sure thing shot. I'm not launching arrows. It's you. I just don't want anything to go wrong. So
Yeah.
I'm very conscious about that.
Yeah. Have you ever had that uncomfortable situation where a deer you shot has ran through someone's yard or something like that?
Knock on wood, I have not. Fortunately, I have never had one. You hear the horror stories. I shot this deer and it ran right up into the backyard and fell over under the kid's swing set, something like that. Knock on wood, I have not ever had to deal with that situation.
Yeah, that would be tough. One of my good buddies this past hunting season had a deer run into his yard and die leaning up against his garage with an arrow still in it.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so that would luckily he was a hunter, and so he was understanding of that kind of thing. But I imagine
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
some people who weren't so comfortable with seeing a dead deer might have been pretty shocked by that.
Yeah, I mean, you can just imagine. What if 10-year-old kid happens to be looking out the window right then? It's just. That's tough. I mean, to be honest, I've had shot situations that I didn't take because I was afraid that was going to happen.
Yeah.
If the deer is on that side of me, I might not shoot it.
Yeah.
So it may be a combination of luck and just I haven't put myself in that position.
Right. I actually. My very first deer, speaking of first deer as we were towards the beginning of our conversation, the very first deer I ever shot was with a bow, and it was on the little piece of property that my parents' house is on, which was a 3 1/4 acre piece, and kind of in a neighborhood sort of deal. And I shot that deer, and when it ran off, and I was all excited and so pumped up, and I went up the hill to get my dad afterwards. And unfortunately, instead of being excited about me having shot this deer, all my mom and dad were worried about was, oh geez, did the deer run into the neighbor's yard?
No.
What are we gonna do? Fortunately, it didn't, but it caused a little bit of stress there at the outset.
Yeah, that can make an impression, and it can be. I mean, there can be bad situations. I was with a friend who shot a deer with his shotgun, and it ran. It was a nice buck, and it ran into this property. We did everything. We went and found the landowner, and he flat out told us, "Nope, if that deer is in there dead, he's staying in there dead." And, I mean, nothing we could do. That's in Pennsylvania. The landowner has all the power. They can just tell you, well, sorry, you're not going in there.
Yeah, it's the same in Michigan and Ohio, and I've had situations like that where I've been afraid that would happen, and that's just the worst feeling ever, is to imagine it being right there and you can't go retrieve it.
Exactly. Yeah, I believe you can call the game warden, and the game warden has a little more leeway, but I'm not sure totally that. First off, for us to get a game warden, that would take forever anyway.
Yeah.
If they would come out at all, because there aren't many of them. But I still don't think even they can go in, because that's not I know they can go on property when they have probable cause for a crime, but that's not a crime. So,
right. It's
anyway.
a tough one. It's a tough one.
Yeah, it is.
Now, PJ, I want to reverse kind of what we've been talking about here for a second. We've talked a lot about, guys hunting in Pennsylvania or the Northeast and what they need to do differently than what we hear about in the media. But what about for someone who hunts in the Northeast, lives in the Northeast, that's all they've ever known, and now they're going to go out for their first trip to the Midwest? I know you've done that a lot. What kind of things would you recommend for that person?
That's heaven for that person, first of all.
Yeah.
My first thing is, hey, just sit back and enjoy it. Don't shoot the first one that runs up. Because it's totally different. I mean, I still get a kick out of it that I'll go out there, I'll sit all season in PA and maybe see 3 bucks, and then I'll go to Illinois and see 10 in my first sitting.
Yeah.
So it's a different. The guy I hunt with in Illinois, he's gotten to be a friend of mine. He's from Connecticut originally, and he moved to Illinois. So I like his philosophy. He has a lot of Northeast hunters, and so you hear about, you shoot anything under 140, it's a $500 fine, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't go by that. His thing is, I have a lot of guys from Massachusetts who've never seen a 130-inch deer. Why am I going to tell that guy not to shoot that deer? So his thing is, hey, if you want to shoot it, then go ahead, shoot it.
Yeah.
And which is a good mindset. But like I said, my thought always is, hey, unless it's, the real holy crap deer, don't shoot that first one just so you can enjoy the experience. Because, with the right weather, there's going to be more coming. So I like to see people get to see that, sit there and see an Illinois rut where one doe comes into heat and all of a sudden there's 5, 6, 7 bucks running through, chasing, checking the scent, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I like to tell people, just to, and also to say, hey, even in Illinois, 160 inches aren't behind every tree.
No, that's true.
So don't, again, be realistic. If you see, if the outfitter doesn't have any rules on it, but if you see the biggest buck you've ever seen, why not shoot it? It's bigger than anything else you've ever shot.
Yeah. To your point, expectations. Expectations are important no matter where you hunt.
They are, because I see so many people who go out there, in hunting with my friend, who just have this expectation of 150, 160-inch deer. Oh, that's all I'm going to shoot. That's all I'm going to shoot. It's not that can't happen. I've certainly been out there with 180, 190-inch deer. I have not shot, but I've been there when other people have shot them. But to be ruined by that expectation, I think that kind of stinks. Anytime you can go sit in the woods and see lots of deer and see some bucks, I think that's a good day.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Well, PJ, I unfortunately have to wrap this up because of a hard stop on my end tonight, unfortunately. But this has been fun. It's been neat to get to hear the Northeast perspective, and I think there's a lot of people who can relate to that enjoy this too. So if people if people want to learn more about what you're doing or where you're writing, where can they go online to find some stuff?
Our website is LancasterArchery.com. And when you're on there, you'll see a little tab on the right side that says articles and videos. We do, we have no boundaries. Anything to do with archery, you may find on there. That's, we found the simplest stuff to the most complicated. We try to provide it all. So that's where you'll find the bulk. We have a YouTube channel as well, Lancaster Archery. They can find videos there. So that's probably the best place to find all that information.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to link to all that. So if anyone listening wants to see some of those things, we will have links on the blog as well. And PJ, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I sure appreciate it.
It was a lot of fun. Good luck this upcoming season.
Hey, thanks. You too.
And that's going to do it for episode number 142. Before we shut it completely down, though, really quickly, I want to thank our current partners who have made this podcast possible. So, big thanks to Sitka Gear, Yeti Coolers, Ozonics, Matthews Archery, Maven Optics, Whitetail Institute of North America, Carbon Express, and Huntera Maps. And finally, big thanks to you guys. I appreciate you so much. Thanks for listening. I hope you've got some big sheds in your future, and I hope you'll stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.